Good morning. This session is Migration Migraine. I'm jgreenberg, and my Drupal name is Green. You have to pay extra for the punctuation and spaces. I'm a senior software architect for Bixel, and I've been a Drupaler since D6 was coming out the door, which is about 12 years. I've contributed a number of books on Drupal, the latest one being the Drupal 8 Quick Start Guide. Have a Drupal blog called The Accidental Coder. I'm on the API documentation team, Drupal.org, and I used to write a column for Drupal Watchdog before it was sold. So, Migration Migraine. The throbbing sensation behind each temple experienced when daring to attempt migrating content from a content management system. So the leading cause of migration migraine, and this might seem counterintuitive if you're new to content management systems, but it's content. It turns out that one of the hardest things to migrate when you're migrating content management systems is the content itself. This would be a good point to ask. How many of you actually are involved in migrations? Fair number. And how many of you have Drupal 7 and 6 sites? So, a good question is, why is content difficult to migrate? If we look at Drupal core, or Drupal as a whole, most of the functionality is core. Probably 80% of the code that you would be looking at if you were looking at the lines of code in your implementation is core code, and 20% contributed custom. But if you look at the percentage when you're dealing with the parts of content that you actually see, then it changes quite drastically. Because if you think about it, other than the vanilla content types that come out of the box, page and article, everything else is pretty much contributed. The field types, the way they're displayed, the way they're handled, the way they're stored. And what happens is that when a new major release of Drupal comes out, what trails everything else is the porting of contributed modules. And that can make life difficult when migrating. So, looking at why content or how content is difficult to manage. Modules may have been migrated, but they function differently than they did in our example, let's say D7 than in D8, or they don't function at all yet. They may have gone from contrib to core with no migration path. Content types may have field types or complexities that defy migration or seem to defy migration. So an example is if you're migrating a D7 article to a D8 article, no extra fields, just vanilla out of the box. That's a slam dunk. There's really no complexity involved, no challenge involved. If you have 35 views in D7 and you want to migrate those views to D8, then you hit the wall, because there is no migration for views from D7 to D8. It's pretty much a manual process. So let me quickly go over how I'm going to approach this. So I'm going to go over three particular challenges that I came across in a migration I was doing. And for each, I'll briefly describe what we were attempting to do, what the challenge was, what considerations and approach was decided upon, and then I'll show you a little bit of the code, and I'll walk the dangerous walk of doing live demo on each to some extent. And I'll try and keep a balance. I don't want to deep dive too much in the interest of time and eyes glazing over, so I'll just skim across what I think is interesting in the code for you to note. So the first one I call location frustration, and the intent of this was to migrate content that contained a location field provided by the location module in D7. And the issue was, and is probably still, that the location module had not been ported. We wanted to have a single portable field structure for the data to be in. So in other words, we didn't want each item in the location description being a separate field. We wanted it to be somewhat like the location field. There is an address module, and that's what we decided to do, or to use, but there was no migration set up for coming from a location field or a location module field to the address module. We wanted it to be achievable in one pass. So in using the address module, we decided the best approach would be a process plugin. So the idea is that you have your migration script, and in your migration script, you're going to refer to the location field. And the migration script is going to then call your plugin, because you're going to reference the plugin, and I'll show you that in a minute. The plugin will then read the location field and write the address field for you. Let's take a quick look at the code. So the code is pretty straightforward in this case. We have in our module folder a source folder, plugin folder, migrate type plugin. It's a process plugin for the migration. And finally we get to the file itself. And this uses something we're all familiar with if you've been coding in Drupal 7 and Drupal 6, good old-fashioned hook. And in this case, when the plugin is called, it's going to hit the transform function, and that is going to get the location rec and create the address record. So basically it's reading the fields from the location record, stuffing them into the address record. And that's really all there is to it. The idea overall is you're interrupting the migration process that's occurring in the script. And when that's happening, you're then taking whatever you want to transform, transforming it, and writing it to where you want to write it. So just make this a little bigger. If I take a look here at the content, you see that the D8 site only has currently one piece of content that we'll use later. So I'm going to tell it to run the migration. Okay, come back. And now we have a piece of contact migration, which we call. And in here, if I can move this over a bit. There we go. We see down at the bottom that we have the location information. One thing I'll point out, in particular to the address module that's a gotcha, is you want to make sure that you provide the country. Even if your location information that you're putting in there didn't have a country, you want to put the country in. Otherwise, when you go in to edit the record like I just did, instead of seeing the location information, you're just going to get a box asking you what country you're looking for. Okay. So let me switch back. All right. The second example I call body double. And in this case, we wanted to migrate content from D7 into a D8 article content type. The D7 article content type had been modified, though. And interestingly, the body field was used for the body text, as you would expect, but the summary that would normally also be part of the body field was being kept in a separate field. We wanted both to go into the body field instead of using a separate field in D8. One of the problems is that there's special handling built into the way migration works with the body field. It's expecting when you migrate a body field there to be one source for that field. And it does its best to prevent you from trying to name more than one source. Normally, for a field that has subparts, you could do something like, say, I want part dot this and part dot that, and then have access to the subfield. But the body field is sort of hardwired in the way it's handled, so it wouldn't allow that. This is what you'd really like to do, but no joy. Tried this too. Just a different format of the same thing. No joy on that as well. So the approach was to override the default migration. And in this case, to use hook prepare row. So hook prepare row tells migration that I want you to look at my code and use it to prepare the row that you're going to be processing, rather than just going strictly by the script. So in this case, we're going to take the body field and summary field and stuff them both into the D8 body field. All right. So we know that we had those two pieces of content. I won't go back and show you what's not up my sleeve again. In this case, we're going to nice short migration script name. Okay. Let's take a look at the code for a second. And this is even more straightforward than the last example. Here you see we have the function in our module file. Basically, it's the module name and prepare row, migrate prepare row, excuse me. And in that, we can do anything we want with the data in the row that's being processed. In this case, we're going to go and check to make sure that we have the source data that's needed. In this case, there was the possibility that there was actually summary text and no body text. So in that case, in this code, we're going to still create the body field and use the summary text as body text. So it's not quite as straightforward as it might have been otherwise. And then we just stuff it into the source and we're done. I did promise to show the script, so let me go back and do that. This was the first one, and you see down in the field address, which is where we were moving the location data to, we called the plugin that we had location to address. So that's what invoked the plugin that took the location data and stuffed it into the address field. In the case of the current example, we're calling the process here to handle the comment field, but you don't see a specific reference to anything in the script like we did with the location one, and that's because we're not using a plugin in this example. We're hooking the preparation of the row in the migrate process. So the script doesn't even need to know what's happening. The hook is going to take care of it. The last one I call e pluribus unum, from many one. And in this case, we needed to migrate video data. And the challenge was that the media field, or the media module, did not have the video portion of it available yet. So there wasn't a contributed module to stuff this stuff into. And it didn't just need to store the metadata, it also needed to allow the playback and work with custom caption file, which I'll be talking about in a second because that's kind of fun. So the meta needed to be kept in a single compound field. And by compound field, I'm talking about something like the body field, and I'll explain more about that in a minute. And we needed to marry the caption file and the video together. So try doing it the same type of way. And the approach we decided on was creating a field type plugin and populate the subfields in the migration script. So here you have the field type plugin, and it's got field properties, field storage, and then field widget. These are all parts of the plugin, and I'll go over this and show you in the code in a minute, and field formatter. The field type is what you would add to your bundle. When you go into a content type and you say, I want to add a field, your field type is going to show up in that list of the type of field you want to add. Then when you actually edit the field, you have the portions of that field that show on the screen where you could go into the form display and change what you wanted to see. And that's handled by the field widget. And then the formatter is what does the formatting, just like manage display. In this case, we just handed it over to a twig file for the theming. Okay, so let's take a look at the code and the demo on this. So if we look at the video type, and then in source, plugin, field type plugin. There's 3 folders: field type, field formatter, field widget. The field type, as I said, describes what you're going to be adding to your bundle. So this will look familiar because you've seen this on form descriptions. These are the subfields, and it's handled the same way a body field is. It's handled somewhat like an entity, in that with a normal field in Drupal, you have a table just for that field, and if you look in the table, there's a few items of meta, and then the last one is typically value, where the actual field value goes. If you look at the body field, you'll see a value part and a summary part, which are both subfields of body. So these would all become subfields: the video title, description, the length. These were being uploaded to YouTube, so the YouTube URL and the caption file, one for English, one for Spanish. Do that. Formatter, as I said, just handing over to a twig file. Nothing special going on there. And the widget is pretty much describing the fields that are going to be seen when you go in to edit it, and what it should do with those. We look at the database entry for that field. You see here that all the subfields are stored in the one table. So it's not what you would expect, which would be a separate table for each of those fields. They're all subfields to the main field, along with some extra meta. The nice thing about this, or the fun thing about this, in getting this presentation ready and in working with this when we were actually doing the migration, with the caption files. I don't know if you've ever done anything with caption files, but you can pretty much take any video, create a text file in the correct format, and that will provide captions for the video. So you can actually have a lot of fun putting whatever captions you want under existing video content. So I used that for the last demo. So this is a, let me go back into the content. In the video content type, we have the video field. If I were to say that I wanted to add a field, even though I have it, I'll just show you. You can see here the video type, and that's the one we created with the plugin. Okay, so the demo. Good morning. Are you ready to get up and come out and play Drupal? You have a lot of work to do today. Oh. Whoa, excitement. Don't you want to work on a Drupal site with me? I really need some front-end help. Fine, I'll give you admin privileges. Come on. There you go. Okay, so right before I go into questions, I just wanted to say, in terms of migration, And in terms of Drupal, the thing to remember is this. So 3 people, a designer, a full-stack developer, and a site builder walked into a bar and sat down and ordered drinks. And they were arguing about who provided the most contribution to their project. And the bartender was listening to them as he poured the drinks. And he walked over to them, and in one hand he had a bottle, and in the other hand he had the mug. And they're looking at him like, okay, and he said, this bottle's got a really nicely designed label. And this mug is perfectly structured, functional, and performant. And you can see that the site was done very, very well. He said, but none of that really matters. What matters is the content. So that's the thing that's going to come up the most often in migration in terms of headaches, in terms of pleasant surprises, and in terms of success. Any questions? Okay.
How long was your migration process? How many months or how much time?
Well, it's hard to pin down because we did about a dozen sites, but I'd say the one that these examples came from was probably 4 months. Yes?
So, Jeff, in your experience, when would you say that it is a good time to use the Migrate API from Drupal? And when would you say that it's better just to write your own script to migrate content directly into the database and doing that kind of stuff?
Well, I'd say that the first thing to look at is what is the impact of what they won't do and how are you going to overcome it. So if the API will handle what you need it to do, then there's no reason to write your own code. If the API won't, but it's just a matter of doing something like prepare row, then that's still the way to go. If you have a case where that's not going to happen, or you have a case where, let's say for performance reasons, you can't do that. We had one migration where we were taking government data from a feed and a D7 content type from an existing site and having to merge them. And the number of records was just so large that we couldn't just let that run during the day. So it went into a queue. So that was the custom code we wrote, to take those two things, throw them into a queue, and process it in a cron queue overnight. So that would be an example of where I would write custom code. But I'd say look at the API first, because it's in core. Anybody else? I want to mention that Pixel is hiring. If anybody's looking for a new career, want to work with really great people, do exciting things, please contact us. And here's my contact information. The code examples that I showed you are all up on GitHub. You can access them there, and you can get to me at any of these 3 ways. And thanks very much.